Turkey and the European Union say they've agreed to a deal to tackle the migration crisis. One of its aims, to break the link between dangerous sea journeys and gaining asylum in Europe. After lengthy talks in Brussels, Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu presented a plan that would see all failed asylum seekers returned to Turkey. Let's have a look at the main points of the deal. Now, refugees denied asylum in Greece will be sent back to Turkey. In return, the EU will resettle one Syrian refugee from Turkey for every failed asylum seeker that it returns. Turkey and the EU will also work on creating safe areas for refugees within Syria. And the EU will speed up its delivery of $3.3 billion in financial assistance, as well as providing additional funds and remove visa requirements for Turkish citizens entering the EU by the end of June. The European Union will also speed up negotiations on Turkey's possible membership of the Union. Well, we'll have more on the implications of this deal in a moment from Salih Ayhan on the Turkish coast at Izmir and Alican Ayanlar on the Greece-Macedonia border. But first, let's go to Simon McGregor-Wood, who's been following the summit in Brussels. Simon, good morning. So, was there surprise that this agreement has been reached?
Well, I think there was to a certain extent, but let's not forget that this is, in very broad terms, an agreement only in principle. You'll remember that during the course of this lengthy negotiation on Monday, there were various pointers and signs that a lot of people had big issues with some of the deals. The Hungarians who were reported at one point to veto the very idea of taking any extra refugees from Turkey. And I think there are a lot of details yet to be worked out between now and next week, when the EU leaders will reconvene with Mr. Davutoglu in attendance in this building behind me to try and dot the I's and cross the T's and get this deal in detail and, don't forget, unanimous approval. We're not there yet, but it was a big step forward.
Well, Simon, let's just go through then some of the details of the deal. One term that's come out and needs explaining is irregular migrants. Who are they and what will happen to them?
Well, I think this is the biggest part of the deal. It's the real headline grabber, and it's the bold proposal that Mr. Davutoglu put on the table on Monday morning, which I have to confess took many EU leaders by surprise. Here's how it's going to work if it is implemented. That's a big if. From a certain date, any person who gets on a boat from the Turkish coast and makes it to a Greek island will be deemed an irregular migrant. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter if you're a Syrian traveling with your children from Aleppo. It doesn't matter who you are. From that date, you will be sent back to Turkey. And an equivalent number of people at that point will be taken from Turkey, genuine Syrian refugees, if you want to use that word, will be taken one for one and resettled in Europe. That is the deal. It's a very brutal deal, if you like, because at some point it's going to have to include people being met on the beaches of islands like Lesbos and told, I'm sorry, you are an irregular migrant, you have crossed into Europe illegally, and you will be going back to Turkey. That's really the biggest part of this deal, and it's going to be very hard to implement.
Absolutely, Simon. The mind boggles at the bureaucracy of trying to meet migrants on the beach and send them back. But on implementation, you mentioned the word. Just how on earth is this going to be implemented? There was already a deal in place between Turkey and the EU from November, and it seems that not much came out of that.
Well, you're absolutely right. The big question here is going to be converting what may be a very complicated document into real action on the ground. And I again refer back to this whole issue of people being sent back from the Greek islands to Turkey, and then this process of deciding which refugees already in Turkey get to then be resettled in Europe, and then which countries in Europe will agree to a process of resettling these refugees. What kind of numbers are we talking about? But it is absolutely clear that, in the words of Angela Merkel, the Europeans, with Turkish cooperation, I have to say, want to break the link between getting on a boat on a Turkish beach, near where Salih is standing perhaps, and this notion that once you've done it successfully, you will be resettled in Europe. It's a hard reality that's going to be imposed on these people, but in terms of the language that we're hearing from the Europeans and the Turkish, that is the intention. That's what they want to do. And of course, then further up the chain, if you like, it's clear that this deal also envisages people being cleared out of Greece and settled in Europe, but absolutely at that point, the so-called Balkan route will be absolutely shut as well.
Well, Simon, for now from Brussels, thank you very much. Now to Izmir, where the Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu has arrived. He's meeting with the Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras, and TRT World's Sally Ayhan is there. So, Sally, what will the two leaders be discussing today?
Well, Kamali, previously the two sides, both Turkey and Greece, have cooperated in terms of trying to tackle human traffickers here off the coast of Izmir, and also trying to stop the many thousands of refugees that have drowned off the coast in an attempt to reach the Greek islands. Now, one of the things that they did establish was that Coast Guards set out of the embassies for both Ankara and Athens. And what's expected is that these Coast Guards will start to help collaborate with the NATO mission that actually began yesterday. Both non-EU member states and EU member states have shipped out their vessels to help patrol the Aegean Sea, which of course is the main thoroughfare for many refugees that are trying to make that very dangerous journey from the Turkish coast to the Greek islands. And of course, as Simon McGregor Wood stipulated about the many other particular strategies, including sending migrants back from the Greek islands, will of course be talking points today as well. Now, Greece is obviously is stuck in the middle of a very difficult situation here. It's created a bottleneck with its northern neighbours closing the borders. And of course, Turkey, with over almost 3 million refugees, is trying to find its own strategy to manage the situation. So no doubt today, a very clear and strategic plan will be set out at this meeting. Obviously, as we've heard, Turkey has now put its cards on the table in terms of what it demands from the EU. And it's going to be interesting to hear what Greece has to say in terms of its demands too.
Well, Sally, for now from Izmir, thank you.